Hello, everyone, and welcome to the HFA webinar, Maintain Profitability in a Difficult Economy. I'm Caprice Crawford, the Education Manager here at HFA, filling in for Mark Schumacher today. Now, before we get started, I wanted to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website, myhfa.org/webinars, as well as all the other past webinars that we have done, so you can check them out. Now, also feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar. There is a chat button on the right side of your screen, and we will get to as many questions as we can. Now, let me introduce our guests. First, we have David McMahon, founder of Perform Now. He is a certified management accountant, certified organizational improvement specialist, and his company, Perform Now, helps businesses and people level up. Now, we also have Laura Crowley, owner of Crowley's Furniture and Mattress, third generation family business with 4 locations in the Kansas City area. And we also have Becky Waldrop, owner of Miller Waldrop Furniture, also third generation business with 3 stores in Texas and New Mexico. Thank you all for being here today. Now, we've received some great questions from our audience already, so let's get started. Now, David, you and I spoke earlier, and you said the number one question you always get are, what are you seeing out there? So let's just go around the room and start the conversation with that. What are you seeing out there? David, why don't you get us started?
All right, well, as you know, Caprice, Becky and Laura are part of our visionary performance group. And we're actually here at a meeting this week with 12 other retailers, and that's the first thing we did is we went around the room and asked how their business is doing. So, and I've done several of these other meetings the last couple months. So what I see out there is it's all over the board. You know, some people are flat, some people are up even, and there are people that have had down periods. So it's really hard to put a finger on it exactly, but one thing that I have definitely seen is more people are delivering more than they're writing right now. But so it's kind of erratic. Too soon to tell whether we're trending in one area or going one direction or not as a broad economy, furniture economy.
Laura, how about you?
Well, you know, from the consumer perspective, I think that we're still seeing a strong demand. I think that throughout the summer has maintained, and even in this environment where there's been a lot of talk about high interest rates and high gas and just turmoil across worldwide, I think that the consumer has endured for the most part in this time period and is still showing strong demand, and that we've had strong sales from our associates and just an internal feeling and kind of the vibe amongst our colleagues or our other stores. I think there's some hesitancy of what, you know, this looming of, we've talked so long about what is normal or return to normal and what that means. And I think that there's that's spoken with a little bit of anxiety because you just don't know what's around the corner. And I totally understand that, both personally and just from our stores, is that you don't know what you're returning to or when you think this thing that we've gone through ends. So I think there's a little hesitancy to say where we're at exactly, but I think the vibe is generally still positive, even with all of the turmoil that we've endured over the last 2 years, but also just in this last 3-month period.
Yeah, we're definitely up over. Yeah, we're definitely up over 18 and 19, so that's still good because we went into this whole traumatic event with great sales, and we're still definitely over that. And I think most people are, so that's exciting. So I agree with Laura that the demand is still there, very much so. And hopefully, I mean, that may not drop off. That may continue. There are a lot of people working from home now. I think the summer was a little bit softer because people could go on vacations and they could eat out. And so some of that money that we were getting before is now going back to its normal channels. And that's exciting for those people. I'm excited for the fall because people are home more, vacations are over, and we have seen our fall pick up tremendously already as of August. So I'm really excited to see what the fourth quarter is going to bring everybody.
Excellent. Now, you all were in business in the 2008, 2009 business climate. How do you think what we're entering into now compares to that time? And what should retailers do to kind of remain profitable or prepare for an economic downturn?
Who wants to go?
Yeah, anybody.
Well, I'll kick that one off. I don't think that this one feels the same, and I don't know, and I think that may be true for every, what's not cyclical economic cycles are not new. They're not new to our economy. They're not new to the furniture industry. So I think that is something that, even though I've heard that, whenever things are good, people think they're never going to get bad. And whenever things are bad, you never think they're going to get good. Did you tell us that, David? You may have told us that. I don't know. Someone told us that, but, so I think that you're always thinking where, you just don't know what's around the corner. In 2008, 2009, however, there was this event, the stock market drop was signified this clear, oh my goodness, and it was more more like the pandemic than it was this time, because there was a singular event or this time that kind of led us to a different state almost immediately. And so that one felt different than this one, which is this, where are we going, and the raising of interest rates, this talk of what's going to happen. So it kind of gives you more of this drawn out, we don't know what's going to happen, really. We don't know how it's going to feel. I will say that one other difference is the housing market is much different than it was in that period, which is, there's still, housing is still very strong, and there's a shortage of housing. And I don't see, if you look at the economic forecast, that really has any chance of slowing down. And then also there's still a lot of liquidity in the marketplace. So if you look at all of that money that went in, that the government pumped in during the pandemic, that although that has been different, I think that for a lot of different, depending on your level of consumer, some of that is gone, but a lot of that went to different people is still out there and can be spent over time. It's not all gone. So I don't think it's similar in terms of the nature of the downturn at all.
It doesn't feel the same in the store, and I don't feel the same ramifications in our store at all. Business is still so strong, and back then business dropped off immediately, and it was dramatic, and we were going through our financials, cutting everything we could possibly cut immediately because it was so bad, and we're certainly not there now. I don't feel that coming on at all. So that's very encouraging. I'm excited about that. And I agree with everything that Laura said. We're going to follow the housing market, and the housing market is still fantastic. Interest rates have gone up, but my gosh, they're still way lower than what my husband and I paid for our first house. I mean, when you look at it long-term, interest rates are still fantastic.
Yeah, I agree with all those things. The thing that I see right now is it's an uncertain time. It's really hard to guess at this thing, because so much of it, there's this geopolitical aspect. We never had that before. Who knows what's going to happen with that over in Europe? And this inflation thing that's trying to be cured with a broad approach when it's a supply chain deal, that I don't know what's going to happen with that. So it's uncertain. So.
Well, and David, you bring up a good point of this, just the supply chain element to our specific industry in this moment in time that was not present in 2008. I don't think that was anything that we were worried about then, or having to come off we were on the heels of something that had been really rocked our, what quote unquote normal inventory flow was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think what we're seeing now is the building up of supply chain, and that kind of happened, I guess, when things slowed down in 2008, 2009. Inventory was easier to come by because there's a buildup possibly on the vendor side of things. So who knows, perhaps prices are going to get cheaper now. I don't know.
Right. On that side of it, the vendors probably are thinking it does feel like 2008, 2009, because it's obvious from every email I'm getting from our vendors that they have a lot of inventory too.
Yeah, Yeah, I don't think they're going to be too happy with their results at High Point.
Right.
That's my opinion.
Yeah.
So do you think that retailers are not going to be buying as strong, or that they still have the inventories in their warehouses that they still don't need inventory as much?
Yeah, I don't think I've
Yeah.
spoken to a retailer that is happy with their inventory right now. They have too much. You know, we had to go buy so wide in order to have inventory during the shutdown. And now we've got all of that width, all of it has shipped, and we've got to figure out what to do. And there's so much expense to that. That's the number one thing towards profitability that our business needs to deal with, and that probably 98% of the furniture stores in the United States need to deal with.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about inventory here a little bit. What are some tips that retailers can do to maintain profitability with that inventory? What should they be doing right now? David, what do you want to kick us off there?
We spoke about this a fair bit in our meetings the last couple days, and you know, there's a number. If you track your inventory to sales rate, inventory divided by annualized sales, then I think almost everybody's up. So they're up almost to historic levels. So that wasn't the case a year ago. It was hard to get inventory. Now everybody's running out of space. It costs them extra money. People are renting warehouses. So they need to right size their inventory to whatever their current volume, projected volume is. So, gosh, vendors won't like this, but they need to stop their new purchases. What can I say? I mean, they haven't displayed, retailers haven't displayed all their old new purchases. So they got to cut their new purchases. That's number one. And number two, if they're deep in something, they might have to, they'll have to find ways to entice the purchase or the sale, both on the customer side of things and on the salesperson side of things. So I don't know what Crowley and Miller Waldrop has to say about that, but that's what I've seen.
But you've got to be the best inventory manager you've ever been, right? I mean, as soon as something sells off the floor, you got to get it off there and get that next item on. We've become much more intense about that. We're not nailing near as much as we were before COVID. Of course, we weren't really nailing anything during COVID, but now we're still not, even though we've got best sellers, because we've got other vignettes that we need to get on the floor. So I think there's even, you know, there's a difference between rebuying best sellers and new buying. And I think there's some discussion to be had about not even rebuying until, depending how bad it is and what you've got on the floor. You know, David's taught us about marking down, that if something hasn't sold in 90 days, that you need to begin marking it down. I mean, maybe even be more aggressive than 90 days, maybe 60 days. So you're going to sacrifice some gross margin, but it's worth it because of that carrying cost that you've got, especially if you're leasing an extra warehouse, and all the moving around of all of it is just a tremendous amount that we don't really see on our financials, but it's happening.
Yeah, I think that the inventory, so there was a lot to unpack there, but there's so much, so inventory, you know, what we do is move inventory. And so that is, you know, touches on so many parts of our business. I think one thing that Becky said is that resonates is that you need to evaluate, for each individual business needs to evaluate what the cost of carrying that inventory is. If you are leasing additional space, that's a huge, that's real money that you're paying. And it's not only the amount of rent you're paying or the additional efficiencies and all those types of additional labor, could be lots of additional actual real dollars that you're spending. So that's an obvious weight on profitability. Then if you don't have that, you have to blend, you know, this idea of the margin, because you know that margin versus the cost of that over inventory. And I think that's unique to each business, but I think it's an important thing to do is to settle down and get a strategy, is what you have to do, and not let it just kind of overtake. One of the things that Becky and I have been talking a lot about while we've been together are these, over the course of the pandemic, we as buyers had to let the lineups get so wide in order to get anything on the floor. So when you looked at a vendor and maybe had 7 slots, it may be you were buying 14 or 15 groups in order to get those 7 slots filled consistently. Well, something magical happened in the water. I don't know exactly still why every vendor was able to produce all at one time and ship everything. It's kind of a bizarre thing, but that's what happened. So then you got all 15 groups. Well, all 15 are probably pretty, if you look at your pandemic numbers, they were all good sellers. So then you have to really weed through that and be intentional about which ones are you keeping and which ones you aren't. Well, you multiply that out by every vendor, you've got a big problem, and it's a lot of work. So you have to, in one case, act fast to get those costs off, but also be intentional where you want to end up, because you don't want to give away your good merchandise just because of for the moment in time. You don't need to, and we don't, and as we well know, we don't know what's around the corner from a supply chain. That's one thing we found out, that our supply chain globally, our supply chain is very delicate. You know, it's like you can't, you know, it's like a pebble in the water, and it just kept going. It's still reverberating across the industry. One thing I've seen with our vendor partners is that there is a mismatch between retail sales. If you talk to them, you'd think that we were destitute, you know, that we aren't selling anything, and that's just not the case. I mean, sales are pretty strong, but our buying habits aren't matching what is shipping yet, and that's going to take a long time to iron out. So keeping those partner relationships, I think, very, you know, talking to your vendors often so that, you know, they really know what's happening, and so that they've been through a tough time, because they went through the same. They've had all these labor issues, they've had raw material issues, and then some of them have put huge capital investments in order to add lines, and now that they've added lines and they're full steam ahead, we're saying, well, hey, we have everything we need. You know, so we have to be sensitive to their issues because they're our partners. And, you know, it's not just this case where, well, I got enough, I don't want to talk to you. You know, they really were critical to each other's success, and approaching it that way right now is more important than ever, because we don't know what's around the corner, and we want them on our team, so to speak.
Yeah, that's interesting that you bring that up, Laura, because I've thought a lot about our manufacturers, and I hurt for them because they've worked hard to get all of this stuff in stock for us that we've needed, and now we're like, hey, I've got enough. And I'm worried about High Point. I'm worried about our reps, you know, because that's how they make their money too, not just the manufacturers. Right. And they are very, very important partners to us. But yet, again, if we don't get our inventory in shape, our businesses are in danger, right? I mean, we've got to get that figured out, because we can't get, if sales were to drop off, we would all be in a lot of hurt. And so it's got to be something that we put ourselves in intensive care and just say, we're not going to buy anymore. But then, you know, what does that do to our manufacturers and our reps? So, because that partnership is very important.
Things need to stabilize. Written and delivered sales before the pandemic were mostly consistent for most every business out there. It's been all wonky the last 3 years. Until it gets consistent, the supply chain, retailers and vendors are going to be, it's not going to get fixed until it becomes the same, because then the flow works better. So
for sure.
We're in the middle end.
Go ahead, David.
I just said we're in the middle innings. If it's a baseball game, we're in like inning 4 or 5.
Yeah. For sure. One thing we've talked about in controlling our inventory is looking at all of your open POs and canceling anything that is, you know, over 2 months out. You know, you just have to decide, because that's the only way you're going to control the flow, is if you stop it, right? So, and then that has to do with the new buying also.
Yeah, a fictitious backlog, I think, has been, you know, part of the problem, because of this mismatch, you couldn't get anything from anyone. You put in so many orders just to get something, and then that backlog, you know, those incoming orders, vendors reacted to that, and then, but that was always not, those orders didn't match retail sales. To David's point, never were you ordering at the rate you were ordering at. Even though demand was huge, it still exceeded demand 3 or 4x just because you didn't know who would ship what when, and it didn't matter what shipped when, anything would sell. And that's a once in a lifetime thing, I hope. I mean, and so, and coming off of that is difficult.
Yeah, we're
So-
definitely not at the anything will sell stage anymore. That's past. Yeah.
So
Thank
right
goodness.
now,
We sold some ugly stuff, so thank goodness.
and I was going to say, right now, because of that demand, you really can't gauge your forecast of what really is going to sell. So if you do go to market in, say High Point or Las Vegas in January, what should you be buying? Should you just stick with your best sellers, your tried and true? Should you look for new product? What should your game plan be?
Well, I know that I am very excited for High Point because our lineups, out of sheer necessity, are the same as what they were in 2019. Would you agree, Becky, that it's like their best sell? I mean, we just haven't had any new goods to really speak of, and then you couldn't you were too worried for lead times. You couldn't order those as deep as you needed to for the lead. It just didn't make sense to put a lot of new product in. So we do need some fresh looks. I mean, our store desperately needs some just new looks. I mean, you look, it's just stale. Not that it's still selling, but it's just time to get back to some normal cadence of the industry and support new introductions, as well as continuing to sell things that are best sellers. But I think we're past the point where we can just buy what's sold in 2019.
For sure. Yeah, because gosh, that's several years, and look at how much our world has changed. Of course, the styles are going to change and the needs are going to change of people. Their lives have changed so much. But again, Laura, you're in a pretty good inventory shape because I've seen your numbers this week. Yeah. And most people aren't. You're the exception because you're very disciplined with your inventory. So I still think that if you're over inventoried, you can't buy, or you're not ever going to get it in control.
Right. Every individual business is different. If somebody's need to right size their inventory to sales to whatever's comfortable for them, and then when they get to that right size, then they will have open to buy again. It may be at High Point, it may be at Vegas, I don't know. It's whenever it's right for them, but there'll be people to sell them when they do have open to buy.
Yeah, boy, will there. Yeah.
And there's a couple things controlling the level for us. When if you look at our inventory where we have issues, you're over inventoried in some best sellers, and that will naturally take care of itself. That's just a matter of time. There's nothing to do. So that is a time thing. Then you have this lineup problem, which I spoke to earlier, that's what you're hoping you can squeeze and then turn some of that stuff that's kind of on the end into some new product. So as we are trying, you're letting those two things just have kind of filtering together, but you have to be really diligent. The other problem, Becky, I don't know if you've run into this, I don't know if we spoke about this, but fragmented inventory. So if you bought a group and got it all in, but sold it at, you're stuck with say 5 or 6 chairs. It's not bad inventory, but you have to invest back in order to sell those 5 chairs. And you have to go through every company and every category and look at those things and really unwind that problem. So there's also that get out of one group and then, okay, I'm going to even up to get out of this group and then get out of that group and then even up. It's a slow process, as we well all know. It's a slow process and one that's very labor intensive from a merchandising perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, that's a good flow. We had a lot of questions come in on merchandising and pricing. And, one question was, how should you price merchandise in a category? Should all items be the same percentage, or should goods be at various percentages? So what's kind of a typical on your floor of markups?
Who wants to go?
Oh, it varies. It varies with the vendor. It varies with the buy, a container buy, right? David told us this week
if you want high margins, it's got to be it can't be a blanket approach if you want high margins. That's my opinion.
Well, I think this is another thing that's unique to this time is that you have to think of value price, what the price is value to the customer, because we all know that what is a sofa worth now? This sofa that has gone maybe varied $1,000 in just the course of price increases across the across the pandemic, what once was a good seller may not be because of price, and you have to kind of look at your floor and just take all those things into account. I don't think any rule of thumb is necessarily can be your guide, because I mean, the pricing's gone up, gone down. You just don't know where you're at. You have to think what works, what moves this product. And maybe sometimes you find that those higher margins, you don't need to lower the price. And sometimes you find that it's just not moving and you maybe need to take a lower mark. It's just not a one size fits all.
It's always
I
been
wish it
about,
was. What?
Yeah.
always been about price point, I think.
Yeah. That's hard.
Yeah.
We used to go by our gut, right? We all knew what a $9.99 sofa looked like. Well, now I don't know that there is a $9.99 sofa feast. So it's really hard, isn't it, to adjust to know what the value should look like? Because if we're having a hard time, then how much harder of a time is the consumer having? Because it's changed so dramatically.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
But I mean, this is this this webinar is about profitability. Ultimately, you have to
You have to decide.
you have to know your margin, and that's going to have to
Yeah.
work out at the end of the day. And whatever way you attack it, you can't just say, oh, this looks this. I mean, you do have to pay attention to that, especially now because
Yes.
we don't know what it looks like anymore.
Yeah.
Right, and on the subject of what's the webinar called, on profitability in uncertain times or something like that, or in times of recession or whatever. So one thing I want to say on this webinar is if things trend down, don't go down in margins, go up, because you have to sell less to make money. Okay, that's it.
And talking about increasing pricing and so forth, there was another good question. It says, is there a good or effective way to pass along additional costs? We're incurring a lot of added shipping costs, added wages are going up. How do you pass along those costs to the consumer, or do you?
You've got to really watch your prices on your merchandise, right? I mean, that's number one, because that's the only way you're going to get your freight back out. Then we've had a long discussion this week about delivery fees. This is the perfect time to raise delivery fees, and it can be so powerful. But gas has gone up, right, over the last year, and so we can all justify increased delivery costs that way. So those are two very magical things.
Yeah, like the combination of protection and delivery fees and trying to maximize that. I mean, if you have to blow out inventory and take a cut there, try to increase your protection and your delivery fees. It'll help offset that somewhat. So.
And so, David, what should we see our delivery income points should be to sales?
Oh, at least enough to cover your related costs. But if you want a metric, a cool one that we like to use is delivery and protection balance of total sales share. So try to get 10%. That's probably best in class. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
However you want to slice it, if you're 10 plus there, you're probably doing decent. Yeah. Top tier might be 15, but 10 would be good for a lot of people.
Powerful.
Yeah.
Now, another great question is how do you handle profit margin when customers all want a discount on everything? How do you handle the discounting within your store as well? I mean, you talked about it a little bit, but give us a little bit more of a guideline.
Well, I think every culture is different in every store. We all handle it differently, right? So, and we all have policies, and our salespeople hopefully know what our policies are and are enforcing them. At our store, we have the regular price that's on the tag, but then we have a cash price, and we promote a lot of financing, and so the financing cost is covered in the price that's on the tag. But the salespeople know that they have room to go down to the cash price if the customer's paying cash. So that's our model.
And I don't think that this is a question that necessarily is unique to this point in time. I mean, I think all discounting is always a question, you know, all this, you know, how do you price it, your tag, what kind of culture it is, you know, at our store, we really try, and we do a good job of this. Our salespeople do a great job of building value into our price. And if our price is our price and we believe in it, and you know, if you can't start, as my dad would say, shaking in the boots when someone asks you for a discount, you know, no matter if you have sold anything that day or not. And, you know, and that's where that comes from, is that idea of hold, be steady, believe in your pricing, no matter if it's the good times or the bad times. Don't go the way of the wind.
Yeah, no, I agree with that 100%. You know, when a good salesperson, when a customer asks for a discount, they should be smiling. Okay, because that means they want to buy. You're almost there.
Yeah.
Why would anybody want a discount on something they don't want?
Yeah. My husband always says, just because they ask, it doesn't mean you have to say yes, you know.
Right. Why
and
not ask?
have the option to say no. And like David said, they're in. So
You're there when they ask for a discount.
And you're
Get
selling
some
value.
sales training on that if you don't know to deal with that one.
Exactly. Now let's talk a little bit about, you know, with profitability comes cutting costs and expenses. What are some areas that retailers, you know, if things start taking a downward turn, that they should look at first in eliminating some costs or cutting? What areas should they start cutting in?
Well, I'm going to start by saying what you shouldn't cut in this economy, and that is your best people. I think we found that out where we, as a just the broader landscape of the labor market, you know, we all wish we'd, you know, maybe attack the pandemic and the keeping our people and who we kept differently, or maybe not. But I think now more than ever, and if there is a recession or a downturn, you want your best team possible. So even though that is a big line on our P&L, I think that's where we start, is saying you start by saying, what do I want to look like at the end of this? And it's definitely with your best team, and then go from there. And so I'd start with what we don't want to cut, and then whatever's at the end of the list, you know that it's not that important to you.
maybe you need to just be sure that you're very aware of what your expenses are, and then make decisions line by line. I don't think that we can sit here and say, oh, well, you need to cut this or cut that, because models are different and priorities are different for every business. But you sure better be aware of what you're paying for things, and know where your money's going, and make decisions from there. You know, talking about not cutting things, of course, we're in a performance group this week. I would say that if you own a furniture store, you have to be in a performance group of some kind. David has some great groups. Furniture First has some great groups. There's a lot of great groups out there. But you've got to be talking to other retailers, and you've got to be finding out what they're doing and getting ideas from them, because there's too many great ideas out there and things to do, and you've got to be plugged into that to be making great decisions about your business.
So I agree on both accounts. Now, on the subject of cutting expenses, if it comes to that, first of all, it's hard to cut your way to growth and profitability. It's really complicated. I would do that only when necessary, but here you can split apart operating expenses into three things, okay? A, B, and C it, okay? A would be absolute necessary expenses. I mean, B would be, I consider like growth-minded investment expenses. And C would be non-critical things that nothing happens. So look at your C's, and it might, whatever, it might be excessive travel, it might be excessive owner profitability salaries, might be cars, meals, I don't know, things that don't move the needle. But those are the first things to slice when you're trimming the fat. So.
And then be aware of your metrics, right? Like you know that your what percentages your admin expense should be and what percentages your selling expense should be, and know where you fall in that. And if you're not in an ideal situation, then really look at that and figure out, why am I so far off, and what's going wrong here.
Yeah, your percent of sales by department needs to be in the right range to give you a bottom line of, I believe you don't want to be under 7 in any time.
For bottom line
Absolutely.
profitability.
Because delivered sales are good for everybody. And if written sales slow, they're going to still have a good year. Okay, it's next year that we're going to have to watch out for. So one thing I wanted to say in this webinar too is, I think the most important thing to watch is cash flow, not profitability right now. Okay, profitability is part of the equation, but profitability is based on delivered sales. Okay, so I think everybody needs to watch their customer deposit change on a monthly and maybe a weekly basis. That's the big one to watch, in my opinion.
So David, are you wanting to grow, or
what's that?
Right now it's a funny question to think about. Do you want to grow or shrink your customer deposits?
Well, right now I don't want customer deposits to continually drain cash, because this industry is different than almost everything else because we have customer deposits.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. So customer deposits come from written sales. So if you don't want to be in this situation, but if you've already had a 100% down, you have income in merchandise and you have to pay for that inventory, you're not, and then all of a sudden you're writing less.
Yeah, exactly.
That's going to fill your cash.
Right.
So just watch out for it. Everybody's
customer deposits are really because in some ways it's you've got your work, it's your work in process, but also it's your Achilles heel. I mean, it's been through the pandemic, our customer deposits have been our largest liability, and we have to work through that backlog. But at the same time, you don't want to shrink it to what David you're saying, and then you have a cash flow problem, and it's representative of weak written sales. So I couldn't agree more that cash flow is the critical element, more so than profitability, because profitability means nothing if you have no money.
Right.
Yeah. And where is most of our cash? It's in
customer deposits and inventory. Just we're always the same in the perfect world. It wouldn't affect cash, and it would be just profit. But so you got to watch those swings. Like inventory went up, cash went down. But if customer deposits go down as inventory goes up, that's bad.
Yeah.
so bad.
And we just had a question come in. Should we be increasing our required deposit? Is that a smart thing to do? And on the flip side, what's the lowest deposit that we should be asking for? So should we be increasing them, or what is your calculation for the amount of deposit that you ask for?
If someone wants to pay me, I think I would never say no. I mean, I guess that's with my general rule of thumb. But go ahead, David. I have a lot to offer on this.
I think now that supply is flowing quicker, and I would try to increase customer deposits because supply is going fast. So why not?
So 50%, is that fair? Is that what y'all are doing?
I would get 100% down if it's in stock, anything reserved.
Yeah.
Okay, that's for sure.
Right.
And it has to be scheduled for delivery, by the way. And I don't know, 50 plus. Ask for full down on anything on order.
Yeah.
I think you can get what you ask for. I think you can get what you ask for is my opinion on it, and that if you can be successful asking for it in full, and I would definitely, my minimum would be 50, but I don't think that it's offensive to ask for everything.
I think now's a good time to try to grow customer deposits.
Mm-hmm.
A year ago when supply chain was all jacked up, I wouldn't have said that because I knew this day was going to happen.
But at least 50. That would be a straight answer, right? At least 50%. But think about going higher. I mean, you could go higher.
Mhm.
And we had another question that just came in. It says, is this a time when smart retailers should be expanding?
Wow, that's hard. I don't know. I mean, none of us know what's ahead, right? I mean, we don't know.
Best time to expand is in a recession and you can get a good deal. So I don't know whether we're there yet. I don't know. Every market's different. Everybody's different. Whatever's right for your area and your strategy. As long as you get the deal. What do you think, Laura?
Yeah, I think that we're coming off of some very profitable years, and it's a great way to invest your profits from the past year, if you want to grow your business, and it's a great use of that money. So I think that it can be. I don't think I would agree with David. It's unique to the marketplace, but it is a good time to look for opportunity.
We both expanded during COVID.
Yeah.
Laura and us.
We
So
opened a new store in May, and that's been been great for us, and it's something that was in the works, but was just the right time to do it. So we thought it was a good idea.
yeah, I guess that was my point. We clearly both thought it was a great idea.
We just don't know that we're
but
smart.
I don't know if it's going forward.
Right. We know we expanded. I can't say we're smart. Right. That's why we hesitated, Becky.
The jury's still out.
Couldn't fully commit to that question.
And
If you did it, it's the right decision.
Yeah.
Okay, there, because you're committed.
Yeah.
David, we just had a question that they want you to revisit your thought on your delivery revenue. I want to make sure that I've captured it. So what was your best practice there on your delivery fees?
Okay, I think you need to at least work your numbers so you cover all your delivery related costs. Okay, so that means likely you need to be at least, probably be a 3.5+% as a portion of sales. Now that's not best in the industry, but that's probably what you need to get to cover your crews and your trucks and your gas. Okay, but what I said is you need to, and you need to charge for mattresses. So if Mattress Firm is on this, well, if you don't want to charge, that's up to you. And everybody else, they should charge.
And so at the highest you've seen people getting 8% and 10%, right, for delivery fees.
There are people doing out there that are charging as a percent of the total sale to figure their delivery fees, whether it's 5, 8, 10, whatever your customers will pay.
Mm-hmm.
It also,
and doing a sliding scale
on the
for the sale.
Merchandise you sell too, because if a sofa costs $20,000, which it does in some places, 10%, $2,000, that's pretty heavy duty. But if a sofa if a sofa sells for $2,200 is not inappropriate. So
I'll chip in on that though, David. It could be inappropriate if we're sending poor delivery teams on the road. It's easy to raise the pricing. We can talk about that here in the but when we don't talk about what value our delivery teams bringing to the customer. We don't talk about that enough. Was my thinking, because if you have a team that is an experienced driver, has a partner, they take their job seriously, they're going into their homes, they know the product, they know the setup, they're polite, they do it. We won't bat an eye with those prices because you believe in it.
Yeah.
And you know what you're sending and you believe in that quality. If you have that quality, charge for it and people will pay it because they want that service. But we have to talk about pricing as well as what we're doing, because I've been embarrassed more than once on what, some stories that we've done, and and we try to focus on it. So you really have to look at what are we sending out there, because labor's hard, and that's an area that we tend to sacrifice on. So if you're talking about cutting costs and you're hiring a $12 an hour person and that's what quality you're getting and sending it into the home, then I don't know, that value may not be there.
Yeah,
That's a great
you
point.
need quality employees, and if you have a quality service, you should charge what's fair for what you're
Exactly.
providing. It is a service that you sell.
And people will
So,
pay for that. People
yeah.
they want to pay for that.
Mhm.
That's what I have found with all this, I think there's a little bit of compassion out there for the delivery driver, those people that are doing those jobs that are customer facing jobs through the pandemic. People appreciate that more, I've found, and that they will pay for that type of service if you provide it.
Mhm.
We forget about the services that we are providing in our stores and the quality environment that we're providing for them to shop at. We had a customer that wanted to buy a particular brand. It was Hooker, and we know that they went to 3 stores before they went to us, and all 3 stores had Hooker. We know that those 3 stores charge less for Hooker than we do. That customer ended up spending $30,000 with us. And we knew that we were the highest priced on that. But he said, when he walked in, he said, I want to shop here. So the experience mattered to him as much as the price. And I think that we get so focused on the price that we forget all of the experience. Especially women, we shop for entertainment. So our stores need to be entertaining when they come in. And if they are, and we're providing that experience, then the price isn't quite as big of a deal. That was a huge lesson for me when that guy wrote that check to us, knowing where he had been before he'd been to us.
Mhm.
Right. Now we had another question that just came in. It says, in a time of economic uncertainty and lower consumer confidence, what is your opinion about potentially higher risk of customer cancellations, and how do you suggest handling or mitigating this possibility? So I think we've all been kind of dealing with this over the COVID. How do we see that in now an economic downturn? Is that going to change, or how are we dealing with that?
Fortunately, our lead times are getting a little bit better, so that's going to help, right? That's because that was the big deal during COVID. I'm not as concerned about that for the future. I don't think our economic times have gotten that serious yet. And if they've put a deposit down, then we're going back to a lot of our firmer policies that we've always had. During COVID, no rules applied. And that's what was so hard for all of us owners, right? Because everything had to come across our desk because none of our policies applied anymore. But now our policies are coming back. So as long as you're getting the deposit, hold them to it. But then the other thing is, during COVID, we talked about, and I think it was Laura's idea to say, well, we're still getting that, and we're going to keep your name on it, and we're going to call you when it comes in, because they didn't have another choice. And they thought maybe they could go find another sofa that would meet their needs, but we knew that they probably couldn't, and that was a good way to save that sale.
Mm-hmm.
And how did that pay off for you, Laura? I mean, did 9 times out of 10 they come back, or how did that all work?
Yeah, I can't say that we had a big problem with customer cancellations. I mean, we all dealt with that supply chain. It was uncomfortable in a lot of ways. But I mean, I think the consumer learned with us that we wanted to get it delivered as much as they did, and I think that panned out okay. I agree with Becky that time has passed in terms of this, like, supply. I think it goes back to the inventory, and we all want, regardless of whether the customer will cancel or not, I'm not sure, but we want to get it delivered, right? We want to get it sold, take the deposit, deliver it. And so matching your inventory to what the customer wants. I mean, I think, Becky, can you agree that the worst thing in over inventoried is then having huge sales of stuff that you don't own, right? Because then right, and then you have to buy that, even though it's so right. You have to kind of merchandise to the delivery that's needed at the time. So if you have enough stuff and you're able to roll that through, then you kind of minimize your cancellation risk while also taking care of some of this inventory. So it's kind of an inventory strategy of, you need to make sure that you have your stuff that you have a lot of in the best position in your store, best displayed, all those things, because that's going to help you on multiple fronts, not just the cancellation, but also the inventory all works together, and the, you know, your customer deposits, all that kind of thing. So they all work together if you're thinking about those things.
Yeah. There shouldn't be cancellations on any custom stuff. That should be part of your policy or whatever.
Awesome.
And anything in stock, it should be scheduled at the point of sale, hopefully, so that the customer, not only did they pay already, they have it scheduled on the delivery date and time. So hopefully that should minimize your cancellations.
And I think that you don't want to be, sometimes people get into panic selling, you know, and that's where cancellations come, is because if things are a little bit softer than they've been, then you get a sales floor that gets nervous and they start maybe pressuring, and then they're selling things that aren't legitimate from the beginning. And then the cancellation is actually generated because we sold in a manner that the customer just wasn't ready. You know, it had
Right.
nothing to do with it. The customer just wasn't ready. So you got to just take, these times call for a calm approach, you know, and just a steady leadership to make sure that we're not getting those cancellations due to something we did.
A bad sale.
Yeah,
I think that's as big a culprit as anything.
right. That's a great tip.
I agree.
In our last few minutes here, why don't we talk about some of the key metrics that retailers should be focusing on that have to do with profitability? What are some of your key metrics that you're looking at that are on the profitability side? David, do you want to start, or anybody?
Oh.
I'll toss it up to anybody.
We've talked about a lot of them through the,
Yeah, okay. Realize, I call it the 50-40-10. Okay. 50% realized margin, 40% operating cost, 10% bottom line. So there's 3 P&L metrics. I mean, there's on and on. We can go, you know, you want margin, protection, percent of sales, operating costs. I mean, what do you guys track? What do you all track?
I think
Yeah.
margin is something that's probably, you know, easy to understand and easy to track, and as good of anything as a good a thermometer as anything as to where you're headed. So I think you can start there.
Sales per guest on the sales side of things, traffic, of course, sales growth, sales decline. Here's one that you should all look at: average website traffic. Okay, because it's an indicator of what will happen, what people in the market. Becky, what do you track?
oh gosh, there's so many, because on the selling side alone, you've got your average sale, you've got your closing ratios for all of your salespeople and written sales. Of course, we all know that ups are down. They have been down. They almost feel like they continue to go down, but yet sales are still doing very well. And then of course our average sales are getting higher than they were. So there's a lot there. So that, yeah, then of course I'm going to keep going on inventory, because I think that's such a big deal for all of us. So that needs to be 20% to sales at the very, you know, at the minimum, maybe. It could go much lower than that. But that would be a good, healthy goal. So I think that that's the fire that most retailers are dealing with, and it's got to stay at the top of watching it.
People
Yeah,
are
I think Becky's right that inventory is going to be the critical metric here in the next 12 months to get your cash flow healthy and kind of to get back to some type of regular cadence. I think that's inventory metrics are critical right now.
Inventory to sales. On cash on hand, that's a good one.
Take a look at your reserved inventory, which has been a real problem right now with housing delays and those types of things. Getting just a really good handle on what you've got is important right now.
Well, and you mentioned reserves, and David, you mentioned cash flow earlier. What are some reserve figures that people should have on hand as if there is an economic downturn? What are some reserve numbers that we should be looking at?
Well, I mentioned months of cash on hand. like operating cash divided by, yeah, like how much cash do you have divided by the monthly operating expenses? What's a good number? I use 3 as a benchmark, target 3+. Again, I don't know, that's in the business. Some people have pockets outside the business, so, but I think in the business, 3+,
Mhm.
Okay,
you know.
great.
So-
I think turning some of that inventory into a cash reserve is a good idea. You know, so I think there's a lot of people that would take a couple $100,000 off their inventory and just turn it to cash and be healthier today and not have made a dime off of that inventory. I mean, I know that can't happen that way, but that quickly. But I mean, I think that people would make that trade. And so if you work on that trade, you can build your cash reserves through a little bit of a sell-off.
Right. Put the practices, get real diligent, put the practices into place so that it starts happening. This is not going to happen super fast.
Right. Well, I want to thank all of you for this discussion. I think it's been very enlightening, and it's really good to hear that it's not as doom and gloom as the news makes everything out to be. That you guys are still feeling good, and you know, into the new year, into the fourth quarter, I should say, coming up here. So again, David McMahon, thank you so much. Becky Waldrop and Laura Crowley, I really appreciate your time and taking time, especially during your performance group here, to talk to all of us. And again, I'm Caprice Crawford, the education manager here at the Home Furnishings Association. This has been recorded, and you will be able to view it on our website at myhfa.org/webinars, as well as all of our other webinars. Thank you so much, and everybody have a great day.